Hello and welcome to this OECD webinar with me, Duncan Crawford. Thank you so much for joining us. Are employers ready to use hiring practices that go beyond looking at traditional qualifications or job titles on a CV? That's one of the questions posed by a new OECD report called Empowering the Workforce in the Context of a Skills-First Approach. The report was released just this morning. With the green revolution, technological shifts, and the impact of AI, the jobs market is packed full of positions that demand specialized skills. But many vacancies stay open because companies are struggling to find individuals with the right skills that match. As a result, lots of people, including the OECD, argue there should be more focus on skills-first hiring practices. Some employers have already shifted in that direction. But how can you objectively assess a person's skills if they don't have a degree or other form of credential? Well, to find out, I'm joined by a panel of guests to have a discussion on this very topic. Joining us on the panel today, Sue Duke, Vice President of Global Public Policy and Economic Graph at LinkedIn. Soon Ju, Chief Skills Officer at SkillsFuture Singapore, a government organisation which supports people to master skills. Atul Satija, founder of the Nudge Institute, a non-profit working to end poverty in India, and Andreas Schleicher, the OECD's Director for Education and Skills. Thank you to all the panel for joining us. We are going to have a panel discussion in a moment. But first up, the OECD's policy analyst, Iván Bornacelly, is going to join us and outline the main findings of the new report. Over to you, Iván.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, everyone, for joining to this webinar. Well, what is a skill-first approach and why is so important now? Employers traditionally have used formal qualifications and prior job titles as the main skill signal. This has been the most practical way to have an idea of the skills that individuals possess and also their proficiency levels. In a skills labor market, on one hand, we have employers that may drop degree requirements for certain roles and instead indicate the specific skills and competences that are needed in a particular position. On the other hand, we have individuals who focus on showcasing their skills regardless on how they were acquired and rely less on academic qualifications. So why is this happening? And why this is happening, why it's so important? In part because skills needs are changing. The vast majority of employers are experiencing labor shortages. A third of employers reported changes in the skills requirement and the emergence of brand new skills. In the European Union, for example, 40% of managers report that skills requirement change very quickly. Given that fact, the existing hiring mechanisms haven't worked to fill the skill gaps. So employers are looking towards new hiring methods. Another reason is that how, where, and what people learn is changing. Adults are more likely to participate in non-formal and informal learning than in informal education. According to the Adult Education Survey for European countries, 13% of adults are enrolled in informal education compared to 40% who are engaging in non-formal training and 65% in informal learning opportunity. This trend can be attributed to multiple factors, including the growing importance of lifelong learning, but also to the increased availability of flexible learning options. More and more alternatives of learning besides formal education have been delivered, which is being enabling individuals to update their skills and in response to the changes in the labor market. Employers today care more about the exact skills people bring than the diploma they hold. On LinkedIn recruitment platform, for example, 16% of all candidate searches in OECD countries use education filters such as skill information, degree level, or a specific qualification. And within that slide, the vast majority rely solely on skill filters. In other words, recruiters are searching mainly for skills and not qualifications. Additionally, across OECD countries, we found that more people are showcasing their skills on platforms, a practice that we call skill signaling. If you look at the figure, you'll see two key points. First, by mid-2024, the average LinkedIn user had listed 14 skills, up from just 10 in 2018. Second, that growth isn't the same everywhere. In Chile, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Mexico, skill signaling has increased substantially. People are not only adding more skills, but building much broader profiles. This makes sense in markets where roughly half of the workforce is informal, and also practical experience and on the job learning matter more than formal degrees. So signaling skills become a crucial component for getting noticed. By contrast, in countries such as Japan and Korea, you see fewer skills listed and narrower profiles. Their long-standing career path and qualification-focused hiring mean that people don't necessarily feel the same pressure to showcase every skill online. Let's break a skill down into 5 big groups: tech, disruptive, industry, business, and transversal skills. Transversal skills are those non-cognitive abilities and personal traits, such as teamwork, leadership, that you won't see necessarily on a test, but matter everywhere. Then we have business skills, which cover the know-how of running or growing an organization, such as project management, entrepreneurship. Then we have tech skills, let's say the digital toolkit, how to use a software, a network. Then we have disruptive skills, those that drive tomorrow breakthroughs, such as AI, robotics, genetic engineering, and they might reshape entire industries. And finally, we have the industry more specialized skills that are those that are hands-on skills needed in a particular sector, like aviation maintenance or pharmaceutical search. Across OECD countries, we consistently find that industry and business skill leads the pack, which means that individuals are signaling mostly fields and sector-specific skills. For instance, in the finance sector, risk management is signaled far more than any other skill. This highlight shows how crucial deep sector-specific expertise means for employers. Let's have a closer look at 2 additional big trends in the way that people signal their skills online. First, we're seeing a surge on transversal skills. Second, individuals aren't just signaling more type of skills overall. They especially boost both disruptive skills and transversal ones. Let's start with the transversal skills. Between 2018 and 2023, the probability that someone would list this cross-cutting skill jumped by over 2.5 times. LinkedIn data even highlights that language proficiency, reliability, cooperation, conversation management, and continuous improvement are among the top 5 skills signaled across OECD countries. Meanwhile, skills tied to AI or automation have also jumped, reflecting also a growing demand for technical know-how. Why does this matter? As automation and AI may reshape jobs, it's the blend of the technical expertise and also the transversal skills that really sets people apart and keeps them competitive in a very competitive labor market. Skill signaling isn't one size fits all. People differ in how often and which skills they highlight. Why? A lot comes down to socio-demographic factors like age, gender, education level, and employment status. These shape everything from who gets the access to training, to what careers they aim for, to how they choose to present themselves online. Let's take age, for example. Younger professionals, especially those that just starting out, are heavy users of skill signaling, maybe because they are more exposed to labor networking platforms. They use it to build their brand and stand out in crowded job market. In fact, in 2023, young adults had a 5% chances of adding new skills, which were the highest among all age groups and the fastest growing rate over the study period. By contrast, older workers tend to showcase fewer skills. Understanding this patterns help us see why different groups approach skill signaling so differently, but also how we might tailor support to each group needs. Skill signaling doesn't just differ by person, it also varies widely across industries and countries. It might be shaped by the unique sector demands or labor structure or policy priority. First, there are sector-specific skills, as I mentioned before, for example, food and beverage operations, which are in high demand only within the hospitality sector, for instance. Also, the construction skills, which might stay within the building trades. These skills are crucial, but narrowly applied. Then we have transversal skills, which light up profiles in almost every sector. These are the glue that hold diverse teams together. We also see cross-country differences, especially among transversal skills. Some countries heavily signal certain transversal skills while others focus elsewhere. That may suggest two things. Countries value different transversal skills based on labor market needs, or individuals feel that they most proactively signal skills that employers might overlook. Here are a few examples. In the Nordic countries, cooperation leads, highlighting maybe flat hierarchies or consensus-driven cultures. In Latin American countries, reliability is one of the top most signal skills, underlining the importance of trust and accountability in very dynamic informal markets. Understanding these patterns help us not only to design training and learning opportunities that fits better learner needs and employer requirements, but also identifying signaling strategies that match both the industry needs and the local context. Public policy is the main catalyst that makes skill-first hiring work at scale. Governments build the infrastructure that employers need, especially among SMEs. It can model the best practices in their own hiring and deploy smart regulation and even provide incentives to drive adoption while managing the risk. For example, in Ireland and Belgium and over 25 US states have already embedded skill-first approaches into the public sector recruitment. And at the same time, many governments are investing in labor market intelligence tools, such as taxonomies, information systems, and matching platforms. These help employers to identify and assess skills more effectively. But policy cannot stop at the employer's door. We also need to support individuals directly. This means strengthening HR capacity in organization. This type of measure may ensure workers have clear pathway on how to develop and signal their skills, and even how to size the new opportunities that skill-first hiring might create. Finally, stakeholders' engagement is crucial. Policymakers must work hand in hand with businesses, especially those that are facing high level of skill shortages and within those sectors that are going through transition. So these measures stay aligned with the real world needs and at the same time could capture the full potential of a skill-first approach. More on this will be clearly discussed during the panel discussion, so I'm very looking forward to it. So that's bring me to the end of my overview. I encourage you to download the report to explore the data that we gather there and the insights in more depth. Thank you for your attention. Over to you, Duncan.
Thank you so much for that, Iván. Very interesting indeed. And to all of you who are already writing in, hi to you, please do send in your questions. Obviously, lots of data and interesting facts there to dig our teeth into. You can use the chat function, which so many of you already are doing. Let's get some reaction to what we have just heard. Let's get the discussion started and maybe start by talking about the implications of shifting from credentials to skills. Why don't we start with Sue Duke from LinkedIn? This report has been released in collaboration with LinkedIn. So let's definitely start with you, in fact, because this shift in focus on skills from qualifications suggests that education systems are, well, maybe struggling at the moment. Some critics would say perhaps not even fit for purpose. So is the growing focus on skills the answer?
Given how fast the world of work is changing, given how quickly these trends are like technology, like economic shifts, like demographic shifts are reshaping the labor market. It means that we need a system that can be much more dynamic, much more responsive, and much more efficient to ensure that workers are in a spot where they can take advantage of these new jobs and these shifts, and companies and organizations are in a spot where they can get access to the talent and skills they need. Iván said it at the problem statement very well at the start, which is we already and have consistently over the past decade had these very acute talent and labor shortages across a whole range of sectors, across a whole range of geos. As Iván was saying, the share of employers in OECD countries just in the last decade who are saying, I just can't get the skills I need, that's already doubled. And we know that we're headed into a decade of enormous change, and change that's picking up all the time. When we talk to workers, we can see very clearly from our own data that they too are really feeling this pace of change and feeling this shift. So when we look at how much skills are going to change by 2030, that's 70% for the average job. And we know that workers coming into the labor market today are likely to have had twice as many careers as workers who joined the labor market just 15 years ago. So that gives you a sense of just how quickly things are changing, the scale, the breadth and the depth of that change. And if we continue to do things the way we have always done them, not only are we going to compound those existing skill shortages, those existing skills gaps, but we're going to fall further behind. And what skills-based hiring does is move us away from relying solely on those traditional signals around schooling and previous work experience, and instead focus in on what is going to be the most fundamentally important signal, which is, do you have the skills to do this job? And there's two fundamental things that skills-based hiring does for us. Firstly, it very, very sizably increases the size of the talent pool for employers, for organizations who need these skills. And secondly, it breaks down barriers to entry for workers who've been historically overlooked. So for the average job out there, if we shift away from the traditional way that we've hired to a skills-based hiring model, we're going to see a 6x increase in the size of that talent pool available to organizations for the average job. And for workers, if I go out today and look for a job based on, not on my current job title, but based on the skills and potential and capabilities that I have, I am going to be qualified for 3 times as many jobs as I would be if I searched the traditional way. So skills-based hiring moves us into a whole different space where we're recruiting talent based on skills and potentials and not just on these old traditional signals. It puts companies in a spot where they're going to have access to more talent, more potential, and it puts workers in a spot where we're going to have this access to opportunity across a whole range of demographics, and allows us to keep pace with all of the changes that are playing out in the labour market today.
Okay, well, I think you've outlined very well there the positives there, Sue. Soon Ju from SkillsFuture Singapore. I presume you agree with what Sue Duke was saying, but do you think most employers would agree with that? Are they ready to hire most employers based on skills rather than a degree, for example?
No, I definitely agree with Sue talking about the rapid change in the workplaces, and the employer today are already enabled through certain platform able to look at skills, using skills as a potential recruitment filter beyond looking at qualifications. But I must say that we have to admit that not all enterprises, especially the small medium enterprises, are able to access platform like LinkedIn or those are the additional platform that mentioned in the report. Maybe because they find that it is costly or they are not aware. So I think we need additional nudges, additional levers to help them facilitate the understanding. So in Singapore, we have pushed out a skill profiling tool. At the current stage is free of charge to test out the market, whether across 1,400 small medium enterprises, if such a platform to allow them to profile their workforce, to understand the skills inventory, would that make them more attractive to want to adopt skill first in terms of understanding the skill stocks, in terms of using skill first hiring, looking at what kind of skills get the employee ought to have, and then move into skills development. So I think we need a lot more support in terms of helping the enterprise, especially the small medium enterprise, to embark on skill first, not just recruitment. I would say that also including skill-based skills development. And in terms of individual side, as Sue mentioned earlier on, those able one are able to use LinkedIn profile, a LinkedIn platform that maybe there are others industry, the way of practices using LinkedIn is not the best way, or using social media platform is not the best way for them to connect and do their work. So I would say there's still a lot of people not using the social media platform to connect and to demonstrate the skills. So again, we need to ask ourselves is then those who are not using it, how can we enable them to do so? So in Singapore, we have started to push out a career skill passport that is designed by the Singapore government, and that allow individual to acquire a skills badge through attending courses that are certified, and then they have a certified skills badge. And we're encouraging employer to go online to the career skills passport to validate the skills of their employee, so the individual over time have a certified skill and the verified skills. And if everybody is doing that, then the whole society will have a trusted system that they know that this is a trusted system, government backed up, and that there's a common skills language, and then employer and employee all can utilize. So at this moment, as our recent report talk about skill first, are we there yet? I think we're not there yet.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And thank you to everyone who is writing in questions. There's lots coming in. And I'm going to ask one in a moment. Atul Satija from the Nudge Institute. I'm going to hand this question over to you from Ernesto Villalba, who writes, how reliable is the assessment of the skills and in these types of skills first approaches? How do you assure the quality of the skills which people say they have?
Yeah. So Duncan, in the formal markets, there are more formal, more evolved ways to look at assessment tools. Like Soon was talking about Singapore, which is a very evolved, very formal, very mature market. So you have very structured ways to look at assessments and look at the credibility of these assessments, because the assessing bodies themselves have credentials behind them. Usually these are regulators, or in India also you have an equivalent National Skill Development Corporation, sector skill councils, etc. But if you look at beyond a few of these sector bodies that give credentials, a very large part of skill signaling today, I would actually argue probably 90% plus of skill signaling is actually informal. Which poses the question saying, so how do you trust somebody when somebody says they have a leadership skill, or a great listening skill, or a great risk management skill, or AI prompt capabilities, for example? We don't have structured systems behind that give these credentials that you can trust. And I think one credible way to solve for it till formal regulators and bodies and assessment agencies come about is actually looking at references and testimonials, which inherently bring trust within that. So if I have the references from my previous employer that I have very good AI prompt engineering skills or judgment skills on financial models, for example, it's easier to trust it because an employer is giving that endorsement, for example. So I think a mix of both formal credentials from accredited bodies or trusted players, as well as a very strong informal but reliable trust signals, is what we need to bring together to be more agile and relevant in signaling skills.
Thank you so much for that. There's lots of people asking questions along these lines. Lynn Marcel from Canada writing in, how do you propose we measure skills to confirm that candidates do indeed possess them? Amira Musa asking what assessments are used to enable these skills-based recruitment practices, especially for transferable skills. The OECD's Andreas Schleicher, can we get your view on that? How, again, it's this how to measure them.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I really want to congratulate Iván. I think this is not just an evidence-based analysis on skills-based hiring, but I think he's also pointing us to some really, really important ways forward. You know, when it comes to to measurement, in a way, degrees are skills. They are just very fixed bundles of skills. And that's the problem of it. They are actually sort of combining skills in a fixed way, whereas what we need today is, combining our skills in a flexible way. Just to take an example, in the pandemic, when restaurants were closed, we had an abundance of people in the hospitality industry that couldn't do work, and at the same time, in the hospitals, we needed people with exactly or similar skill set, but we couldn't hire them because the qualifications and degrees were different. And I think that's the problem, really, to solve. That's where the skills angle really comes in. We should also not see, skills is different from education. Skills don't fall from the sky. They're always learned through education, formal education or informal education. And so I think skills is the outcome, education is the means. And degrees are just ways of signaling this. Now, one of the things when it comes to measurement that is really quite striking. Very recently, we published results from the OECD survey of adult skills. And what we found is that despite everything that we say here, and we all agree on this, degrees remain far more predictive on the salaries that people have than actual directly measured skills. And this is a puzzle in a way. Why is it that when, on the one hand, we need people with, flexible skills, we still value degrees? And I think the answer to this is really the lack of really good measurement tools. And I think what Sunju has highlighted is really where we need to get, the skills passport in Singapore. On the one hand, giving people greater ownership over what they learn and how they learn and where they learn and when in their life they learn. And at the same time, to have that kind of currency that, the way we recognize skills is stackable, is transferable, is used in different contexts across occupations. And measurement of that is not easy. That's, why employers still continue mainly to rely on degrees when, they decide on the salary that you get, because it is very hard to recognize directly what skills you have in a specific context. Self-reports are not a particularly good way of getting that. We need to have direct assessment tools. We need to, and those tools exist, but they are not deployed at large scale. They're often deployed in very, sector-specific ways. The IT industry is very, very good at that. Many other industries are far behind in this, but we need to have, better tools that recognize what people can actually do in their job, rather than where and how long they have studied to acquire a specific skills bundle. And that's really the challenge, but the evidence suggests we're not really very good at that, because at this point, again, your salary mainly depends on your degree and only to, a small part on the skills. At least that's what, our data on this shows. So we really, I think the answer is we need to create a better ecosystem. We need to make skills a currency of 21st century. It's the kind of, skills passports, credentialing system, micro-credentials also is another tool that we can deploy much more strategically. Now that basically people get, recognized for smaller increments of learning, even if they go for longer studies, and that we can just better see what people know and what they can do. I also want to, make one last point when it comes to measurement. We use the shorthand skills, but what we really mean, I think all of us mean, is competency. It is not just what you can do, it's what you know, what you can do, and your attitudes and values. All of this enters into this equation. Employers are not just interested in, practical skills. They are actually interested in your capacity to use what you know in an applied setting, and your judgment and all of that. So I think it's really the concept of competency that we should put at the center here.
Thank you so much for that, Andreas. I saw some of the panel members nodding their heads at parts of what you were saying. Sujit from LinkedIn, if I could turn to you. Are some people at an advantage where they can signal their skills more effectively because they're in certain career paths?
To pick up on what Andreas was saying there, this shift to a skills-based system and shifting to skills being the currency of the labour market, as Andreas said so well, is important across the board for all workers, for all sectors, and for all labour markets. And to give a very concrete example of what Andreas spoke about there, understanding not only how do all workers signal skills in the right way, but also understanding what are the individual skills that make up a specific job. So just as you said, Andreas, we can think of degrees as a fixed framework of skills. We can also think of jobs as a fixed framework of skills and tasks and competencies. And if we can get to a spot where we can break down those individual jobs into the individual skills that make them up, that opens up a whole world of opportunity for all kinds of workers. The very specific example that Andreas gave, that during the pandemic, we saw obviously a cratering of hiring around food servers, right? Obviously, all restaurants and hospitality closed. And so those workers were in a very, very tough spot. But we have this great tool on LinkedIn called Career Explorer, which allows you to do exactly as Andreas was describing, breaking down the skills you have and understanding how does that match with a specific job and the skills that make it up. And the overlap can often be very, very surprising. For example, getting that food server into a customer service role, which was obviously a role that surged in demand as everyone tried to figure out the technology and all of the digital dynamics during COVID, there's a 70% overlap. Likewise, when we look ahead to some of the changes that are coming as a result of AI, take a role like administrative assistant. That's a role that some of the tasks look likely to be disrupted by AI. But when we look at the skills that make it up, there's a 50% overlap with a role like event coordinator, which still is going to be a role that will continue to grow and evolve over the coming years. So what's going to be really, really important here is our ability not only to ensure that workers can signal these skills, but that we can trade and work through skills as this currency of this labour market. That is going to matter for workers, it's going to matter for organisations, and crucially at a macro level, it's really going to matter for labour markets as they try to figure out how are skills changing, what are the skills that are going to be in demand, how do I get my skills provider set up so that they can be responsive to this, so that workers then are in a spot where they have the skills they need and companies are getting the skills that they're going to need to be successful as well.
Thank you so much for that. And I see Soon-Ju from SkillsFuture Singapore has a hand raised. So over to you.
Thank you. I just want to write on what Sue and Andrea just mentioned about skills as a currency. And skills as a currency, it is not an easy concept because it is relatively new. Most of us from school day, from family, we may have learned about financial literacy, earn your money, save your money, invest wisely, and then spend within your means. But skill literacy is a very brand new concept. And I thought a lot of the analysis from OECD, from LinkedIn, and even from Singapore, we are trying to make skills literacy a common knowledge to everybody so that they can understand the architect or the anatomy of the jobs, the tasks, the skills they perform, so that everybody can have a common language. And that will take some time for people to understand and use and understand what they have and what is required of the economy as things are moving very quickly and changing very quickly. So January this year, SkillsFuture Singapore will launch a job skills portal with the intention is to democratize the job skills data for individual to play with it, for company to play with it, to understand that how are job content changes, how are different kind of skills. For example, I think Iván's report talk about a different classification of skills. We classify skills differently, but we try to help people to understand their skill set represents certain kind of center of gravity, that the functionality they do, but there are certain transversal skills that they need. And I think we need to keep using this kind of languages in an issue by authoritative sources, like if it's a government and Singapore government, if it's a OECD, somebody has to be authority enough to say that this is how we call skills requirement in the job. I think we have to keep pushing for this before it's become a common skills language for individual and employers.
Thank you so much for that. There have been a number of questions about how to move employers towards using a skills-first approach. And here's one of the questions here. Patrice de Brucker, I'll give this question to Atul Satija from the Nudge Institute. Says, Atul, Patrice asks, how do you move regulated professions towards a skills-first logic? For example, psychologists whose competencies are only validated by narrow and specific diplomas, Patrice writes.
Yeah. It's actually far easier to do in non-regulated industries, and hence the question is kind of very interesting. I think in peacetime, the education systems are a good reflection and they work. But I think in war times, like when you saw the Y2K in around 2000, we saw a lot of skilling immediately shifted from signaling from degrees to credentials and brain bench like certification, stuff like that. We are seeing something very similar in AI right now. But in formal industries, there are skills people are picking up which are beyond. For example, doctors are now doing remote surgeries. Now, it is not in their formal degrees, but technology has evolved and they are using more advanced technologies. But how do you signal as a doctor who can do remote surgeries? Because there is no formal credential today for it. Maybe it's an offline skill I picked up in the last 2, 3 years. I think we need to build on top of formal skilling systems, going back to micro credentialing, even in regulated environments where you can signal skills from practice. And in those domains, there are respected ecosystems of researchers, academicians, other experts who kind of signal that you know the skill. And there is always this space in this sort of formal regulated market, call it like 10-20% cushion on top of signals which are not yet reflected in the education system or regulated systems. So you have to play in that domain, and that domain will remain, call it informal signaling, batches, credentials, informal degrees, etc., through which you have to signal this.
Thank you so much for that. Andreas Schleicher, let me bring you back in. There's a question from Camilla Stronati, who asks, what does this mean for education systems and for countries that heavily rely on qualifications and certifications? Should they, for example, develop shorter qualifications in collaboration with employers to ensure quick and relevant training? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're moving in that direction. You do already see how, micro credentials become, more like a currency and at least to become a good complement. Some industries are becoming very good at that they actually develop their own kind of smaller increments, giving you greater ownership over what you learn and how you learn and when to recognize this. You can see that also across countries. You take a country like like Sweden, for example. Why is Sweden doing so well on lifelong learning? Because, the labor market is giving you opportunities to combine working with learning, and it recognizes these smaller increments of learning. So systems that are heavily credentially focused have a much harder time to motivate people because it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy to acquire another degree. And by the time you graduate, that may no longer be the best thing to have studied. So I think we are moving in that direction. I think the important transition here really is that in the past, we used to learn to do the work, and now learning is the work. So the more we can actually integrate working and learning, great places of work these days are great places of learning. And great places of learning are very, very good in anticipating the evolution of skill demands. And so, in a way, I think education is moving in that direction. I don't believe that we should expect from education to get people ready for the work labor market. I think it's actually counterproductive because by the time they graduate, the labor market will be different. What we should do is, give them that energy and motivation and the right strategies to learn autonomously, to learn, be willing and able to chart their future, to take ownership and responsibility for their future. I think if we achieve that by the time people graduate from school, I'm pretty confident that a more granular approach to learning and we'll do the rest. And don't forget that we now have the digital world here, where actually the possibilities for people to chart their own learning pathways are enormous. If you ask me, how I see the future in all of this in education, just imagine that we would have, free and open assessment tools where anytime, anywhere you could look at, what are my strengths? What are my challenges? Where am I good at? Where do I want to come really good at? That you can do that kind of self-assessment. And imagine that you have another kind of portal where you could see, these are the jobs today and these are the skill requirements of each of these different jobs. And then, you could do that matching. You could say, well, with my current profile, I could engage in those kinds of futures. If I add these kinds of skills to my profile, I have another opportunity set. If we were getting into that kind of space, I think we would see a very different learning behavior. Because if you ask me, my greatest concern here is not the credentialing part. My greatest concern is that we do not see much engagement in adult learning. Actually, despite all what we say here, the incidence and intensity of adult learning remains pretty low. And when you ask people why they don't continue to learn, 60% of adults say across the OECD, I don't need it. There is not that awareness of this continuous investment, and we need to create that supportive system that helps people see their future, where they fit into this. That's really what education is about these days.
Thank you for that, Andreas. And I'm going to apologize now in advance to everyone writing questions in. There's no way we're going to get through all the questions. Apologies in advance. Even the questions I want to ask, I saw Sue had her hand up. Others have had their hands up as well. Sue, I'm going to bring you in because there is a question here from Dear Hell Kent, who writes, how can an applicant show that they do have the right skills or transferable skills and experience in the initial phases of recruitment, especially CV screening? And as you're at LinkedIn, you're probably the best person to ask.
It's a great question, and I'd really encourage you to go and take a look at our skills match tool, because this is a really great what this gives you is the ability to take a look at, okay, what skills do I have? What job do I want? What skills does that job need? And if there's a gap between the skills I have and the skills I need to do the job I'm going after, specifically, what is that gap? And then what are the specific learning courses? Andreas referenced a whole range of resources that are available today. What is the specific bridge of skills that I need to cross to get to that job? And what are the specific courses, on-demand courses that are available to me that are going to get me there? And that, what we've seen, what Andreas and Sue were speaking to, is so true. What we see is that has this enormously empowering impact on job seekers. So to give you a really good example, what we see is that when job seeking happens through that skills prism, we see a big impact on women, for example, a big increase in them applying for jobs that they are qualified. So that very well documented high self-qualification bar that women put in, it means they often don't apply for jobs that they are qualified. When we break down jobs into these individual skills, when we move to this skills-based hiring and bring this transparency to the process, actually we see almost twice as many women, an increase of twice as much for women versus men when we do that. So this transparency, getting to grips, doing a full audit of your working history, of your competencies, documenting them, signaling them on your LinkedIn profile. And the more context that you can add, the more specifics you can give of, I acquired this AI literacy skill by doing this course, by working with Copilot and X, Y, and Z specific project, that gives the recruiter a signal of, this is a person who's skilled and invested in this area. This is a candidate that has real potential for me. And when that happens, when we have this matching, this dynamic based on skills, based on experience, based on potential, when that is the dynamic that's out there in the labor market, that's when we see this real dynamism, this real efficiency and transparency coming into the market. That, of course, is great for those candidates who are going to qualify for 3 times as many jobs. But it's also great for the organizations, not only because they have a much bigger pool of candidates available to them, but we also see that when recruiters hire through skills, they will have a 12% increase in the quality of hire that they've brought on board. So making sure you're investing in, first of all, getting these skills and investing in signaling and giving as much detail and context around the specific skills and competencies that you've acquired, that is going to be very good, very, very good news for your future employability and for your specific job hunting.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that answered the question very well. Soon Ju from SkillsFuture Singapore. Here's a question for you from Karen Cripps, who writes that skills such as green skills capture not only knowledge, but also values and attitudes. How are skills associated to mindset effectively signaled in the recruitment process?
Yeah. First of all, before I answer Karen's question, I thought maybe I want to go back to what Iván's the report by OECD is so well written that we have not talked about much. It is the demand of skills at the workplace, and it's not always the skill first is not always about at the recruitment phase. It is actually where the business is transforming, the need is required, and how would employers signal the changing skills need to the incumbent employees and then go about developing skills. And I thought the report has really a good coverage, and we have not discussed so much at this platform at the moment. And I thought we should also talk about that because a lot of time we are not, the whole labor market is not looking for a job all the time. Majority of us are trying to do our job well and think about what kind of skill set needed to help our workplace transform. So the skill first should also focus on how does workplaces go about developing opportunity to grow the skills of the people, advance their skills for tomorrow through to project work. So I thought that's quite critical for us to remember to read the right chapters in the report. Coming back to the question on whether green skills covered the ethical considerations, I would say that when the skills is required for whether sustainability or digital, it is not a single siloed skills. It is always a bundle of skills that required for individual to be able to execute and do their job well. So if we look at how in Singapore we go about identifying the defining skills of every single job role, we call them the skills DNA of every single job role. You will see that there are a variety of skill set within there, from transversal skills to kind of ethical considerations to how do you deal ethically with products or people. So I think there's a variety of skill set where there is as captured in the defining skills. So we shouldn't be isolating, looking at one single skill. This is green and this is not. Typically you require a bundle of skills to be able to effectively execute a job role.
Thank you so much for that. Let's bring in the OECD's Director of Education and Skills again, Andreas Schleicher. A question for you from Luciana Sattler from Brazil, who writes in, how can governments support startups that are focused on building a skills-first approach?
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, I want to, I think reflect on something that Sunju just said, which I think is really important. A green engineer and a brown engineer are not very different in their education. They are engineers. They're really good engineers. What makes a brown engineer a green engineer is just, reconfiguration of their skills in a different context. And that's really where we need to get to, that actually this becomes possible, that we are not locking in people into different kinds of occupations with their kind of degree and qualifications, but that we recognize and allow them to reconfigure their skills and to deploy them. But to answer the question on the role of government, I think the best thing that governments can do is actually to provide that kind of platform that recognizes credentials and skills. Ask yourself why universities remain so powerful in this whole ecosystem and so influential on wages and employment. And the answer is they're very, very good at creating monopolies. And those monopolies are built around combining content, delivery, and accreditation. But today content can be anywhere, we all know that. Digital kind of platforms, we have them, governments can enable them, support them. Delivery, you can learn anytime, anyhow. I think that's no longer sort of something specific to education institutions. It is the accreditation part. If governments take a stronger steer, I think actually the Singaporean example is interesting because the government has not reshaped the institutional landscape. They let universities there, they let employers do training and so on. What they have done is build individual learning accounts. In a way, that's, I think, the strategy where governments can help, set the playing field. And then startups will have a much easier role. At the moment, how do you compete with, Harvard and Stanford and Cambridge? It's very, very hard for any incomer into this, and not even to speak of a startup. But the moment we recognize the outcomes directly, that will all be very, very different. So I actually think, for public policy to take a stronger role in shaping that kind of credentials landscape. At the moment, it's so confusing, it's so convoluted that, employers can't make sense out of it and individuals can't navigate it. And therefore, they go to very traditional educational pathways. The moment you bring some structure, some order into this and some, recognized means of validation, you have a very, very different environment. And Singapore has done that. The Netherlands has gone that route. I actually think we will see increasing efforts to make this a more level playing field that will be much more supportive for startups.
Thank you so much for that, Andreas. Let's bring back Sue Duke from LinkedIn, perhaps only for one more time. We're running low on time. If you had to redesign a system so people who didn't have formal qualifications could credibly show what they can do, what would that system look like?
I think it comes down to a lot of what Andreas and Iván are speaking about, which is how do we set up a system such that skills are that currency of the labor market? That means that for job seekers and workers, we have a system whereby I think Suju's point about skills literacy is a really important one, where we're educating job seekers and workers about skills so that they understand how not only to acquire them, but how to signal them, how to apply for jobs, understanding them on the basis of skills. And then on the organization and employer side, how do we shift both private sector organizations, but also governments, because I think the other thing that governments can do is lead by example and start, public sector tends to be quite a large sector in many countries. How do we also set up on the demand side, those companies, those organizations, such that they're going out and looking for candidates on the basis of skills. And when those workers come in, we're continuing to upskill and reskill those workers through a skills prism. That's also going to be crucially important. It's right the way through that we don't think about this as a one and done or something that only happens and a language we speak only when there is a job match to happen. But how do we shift the entire system such that it is based on skills, that is the currency, that is the language that we speak? And I think if we do that, the size of the prize is very, very large. It's very big for workers across the board, as you're getting at Duncan, especially those workers who've historically been overlooked, partly for the reasons that Andreas was speaking. Maybe they didn't go to the right university. Maybe they don't have the right degree or the right job experience, but they do have the skills. And then also for those companies and organizations, we have got to change how we did things. Those organizations today are not getting the workers' skills, the talent that they need. So we need to break open the system, unleash that potential so that organizations can tap into the full human capital that's available in their labor market. So I think there's a path through. I think the report that the OECD have put out today shines a light on the problem, how we can chart a way through and exactly what the prize is if we can come together and make that work.
So Sue there posed the question. I'm going to ask Soon-Ju to answer it. It's a big one. How do you shift the public and private sector, particularly the public sector, sometimes not as dynamic as the private sector? How do you shift the public sector so they're looking for skills-based candidates?
I must say that the employers, including public sector, are already shifting. As Sue mentioned about LinkedIn, and in Singapore we are also using LinkedIn platform to recruitment for our own candidates. Yes, indeed, because the skills will allow us qualification, tell us certain proxy of competency and skills, but in addition is, do they have the latest skill sets? So I think it is not that public sector are not doing it. I would say that how can we get more employers to do so? I think the capable one, especially the bigger employer, including public sector, may have the resources to be able to subscribe to platform, use certain kind of skills measurement, use certain kind of skills inventory system to do that. It's how can we facilitate and help the small medium enterprises to come along the same way, because they may not have the full team of HR, L&D people. How can we make these resources accessible to them? So I think that is quite important, and that's exactly why in Singapore we want to make available available data as a service, dashboard as a service. They can mine their own data. They can compare themselves with other employers, looking at who is recruiting what kind of skills is latest needed. So I think these are resources that we need to put in place as a public good for usage. For the bigger boys, they can subscribe to other system. By all means, they can do so. So I think we really need to facilitate from the government perspective, more levers and more resources available to small medium enterprises.
We're really short on time. So Atul Satija from the Nudge Institute, looking to the future, do you imagine there will be a world in the near future anyway, where a skills-first hiring does become the norm?
So Duncan, in places like India, where we are 90% informal economy, 93% informal economy, we don't have enough degrees to signal that anyway. So informal economy has always been skills first. Now we have to say, how do we make that 93% almost 100% by getting the formal economy also start to realize the value of signaling skills? If we really get it right, I really think for countries like India, you have 100 million people that will enter the workforce in the next decade. And rather than fundamentally asking what degrees do I need, they will say what skills do I need to have. And you will actually be able to build a future where the learning is a lot more mobile. It's a lot more intuitive. It's a lot more real time. It's a lot more, call it AI first, voice first, human first. And it is not based on systems, technology. So it'd be a lot more equitable and inclusive way of building the labor force and the work economy than we have today. So very bullish about it, at least for countries like India.
Thank you so much for that. And a final thought from Andreas Schleicher, because we are running low on time. Andreas.
Well, I think Atul has framed it perfectly. If our labor markets can be more informal, I think in the sense that, we are better at, valuing skills that people have. I'm sure, education is going to respond to this, and we're going to see better matches between the skills that people have and how we deploy them in our societies. I'm pretty optimistic. I just worry that it's going to take us too much time because realities change very quickly.
There you go. Things take too much time. But everyone watching this webinar now has a fairly good idea about what needs to happen. So if you can influence events, you can push things forward and make sure that things do move towards a skills-first approach in a slightly less time. That's all we've got time for, speaking of time. Thank you to all our panelists and to all you watching today. On the panel today, Sue Duke from LinkedIn, Soon Ju from SkillsFuture Singapore, Atul Satija from the Nudge Institute, and the OEC's very own Andreas Schleicher, and of course as well, Iván Bornacelly with that presentation at the start. If you want more information on this subject, which of course you do, check out the new OECD report on it. It's online right now. It's called Empowering the Workforce in the Context of a Skills-First Approach. You can see it on our website. You can download it, get yourself a copy, and it is packed full with data and analysis. Well worth reading. That's it for now, though. Thank you to the production team led by Kevin Gillespie for setting up this webinar. And most of all, thank you to all of you for taking part and sending in your questions. Apologies, as always, we didn't get through even half of them. That's it for now. All the best.